commissions have shown the nature of organized police departments in general, and the NYPD in particular. The NAP Commission, originally formed in 1970 by liberal Republican Mayor John Lindsay, found within the New York City Police Department widespread corruption related to gambling and drugs. The highlight of the testimony during the NAP Commission was the appearance of the honest cop Serpico, who exposed the routine corruption of the department. This commission divided the police department mainly into three sets of cops: vegetable eaters and meat eaters, and the other cops who watched them without doing anything. The narrative was that the grass eaters were the police that under peer pressure accepted bribes or even sought little teeny bribes of $20 or less, and the meat eaters were the cops who actively and aggressively sought and even extorted large bribes. Think about it. There was so much corruption that they had to make excuses for the routinely corrupt cops. This creative metaphor of meat eaters and grass eaters was snatched out of the air, apparently to avoid what would have been the very reasonable demand by the public to put half of the New York City Police Department in prison. Because for certain, over half of the police were either involved in the corruption or knew about it and did nothing to stop it. The 1993 Mueller Commission uncovered massive drug corruption, organized theft, excessive use of force, and the frequent use of drugs by the police. The meat eaters were still around and were immortalized during the investigation by testimony against and by two of the worst meat eaters in the department, Officer Michael Dowd and his partner, Kenneth Urell. Urell, who cooperated and provided evidence against Dowd, actually ran a drug ring out of Suffolk County. All of this uncovering of corruption was rehashing well-established territory that had been unearthed almost since the founding of the NYPD in 1845. By 1894, the Lexow Committee of the New York State Senate, named after State Senator Clarence Lexow, demonstrated essentially the same thing that every other examination of the police, such as the Duran Report, the Seabury Report, etc., have revealed. That is the fact that police involvement in extortion and corruption, especially as it regards gambling, prostitution, and illegal substances, that would be alcohol during Prohibition and drugs now, is quite widespread. The Lexow Report also proved that promotion within the New York Police Department operated on a system of bribes starting at $1,600 to be promoted to sergeant and up to $15,000 to be promoted to captain. So maybe racism alone doesn't account for the dearth of black officers in the higher ranks of the New York City Police Department. Maybe black officers just don't have enough money to purchase promotions. Each of these reports resulted in efforts to reform the police. However, despite all efforts to reform the police, all investigations continue to show that police culture is rife with excessive force and corruption. In the early to mid 1990s, Amnesty International demonstrated not only the excessive force used by the NYPD, but also the obvious ineffectiveness of what some had touted as the definitive reform of the police, the so-called Civilian Complaint Review Board. Amnesty International showed that this review board provided little remedy for people brutalized by the police. It showed that 89% or 79% of the people killed in police custody were black and Latino. It also showed that this misnomer appendage to the police department brought no justice to 98% of the complainants and provided only a laughable parody of justice to the other 2% of the complainants. The laughable parody of justice was the offending officer losing a few vacation days. Predictably, this so-called civilian board was not civilian in any way. It was headed at one point by former police commissioner Richard J. Condon. In Condon's own biographical interview, he claims that earlier in his career, prior to becoming commissioner, he investigated and uncovered much of the evidence of how corrupt the police department was. He describes in that interview a system he learned of where police were collecting regular bribes. He describes a system so sophisticated that it involved pickups of cash by ex-cops who would get that money back to the active duty cops at the precinct, where it would be divided up from the precinct captain on down. Yet, when Condon was commissioner, and when he, just speaking about commissioner of police, and when he was commissioner of police, and when he later headed the CCRB, he provided those light punishments referred to in Amnesty International's report. Almost everything done to rid New York City police culture of violence and corruption has made no difference. Now, I pointed out that I was speaking of when he was commissioner of police because he was also a special commissioner for the investigation of the school district. And when he was in that capacity, he gave out punishments like he was giving out lunch. But whether the man has been conservative, liberal, or extremely liberal, the police have remained corrupt, racist, and also killed people, especially black people. A record number of police killings, a record that has since been broken, of New York City citizens occurred on the watch of one of New York's most liberal mayors, John Lindsay. He was a Republican who later became a Democrat. In fact, 93 police killings occurred in the year 1971 alone, even as the Knapp Commission had just begun to explore police corruption and misconduct. Mayor de Blasio, another liberal, was disciplined, some might even say punked, by the NYPD for saying, perhaps sincerely, that he feared for his black son's life in light of police violence against black men. The police spanked him thoroughly by physically turning their backs on him at several public gatherings. After that, his very believable comment about fearing for the safety of his black son was never repeated. Eventually, Mayor de Blasio was forced to change his tune so that to this day, anytime circumstances force him to issue a statement regarding blatant police misconduct, it is always preceded by an out-of-tune refrain singing praise and gratitude to the NYPD. This courteous, honorable, and professional crew that has been repeatedly proven to be riddled with corrupt and brutal bullies. This cowering of the mayor reminded black people that as they seek solutions to current and present and past police violence and police terror, they have something else much worse to worry about. That is that the police are not even under civilian control. An unchecked military is one of the most dangerous situations any government can have. I say reminded because many already knew. Many remembered how long before de Blasio's tenure, one day immediately after the St. Patrick's Day parade, hundreds of armed, drunken police banged on the windows of City Hall, cursed, rebuked, and threatened the city's first and only black mayor, David Dinkins. So historically, black people, even black mayors, have two types of cops that they have needed to worry about. The bad cops and the good cops. They're actually a third type of cop. They are not killer cops. They are excellent, perhaps even revolutionary cops. They will not be reviewed here because when the bad cops and the good cops suspect such cops exist, they retaliate against them. Frank Serpico was a cop that the bad cops suspected of being such a cop. Consequently, they set him up to be shot in the face during a drug raid. Fortunately, he survived. So back to the bad cops. The bad cops are the ones that are revealed over and over to be the sadists of marginal intelligence that murder black men for crimes such as allegedly handling the wrong $20 bill and giving it to a store owner. The bad cops are the ones who beat a nurse in the Bronx named Yvonne Smallwood to death over a parking violation. The official version is that she suffered a massive stroke. The stroke occurred, however, after the police beat her up. The medical establishment often supports the police by covering up their violence. In the 70s, the doctor said that Robert Torsney, who shot dead a teen, Randolph Evans, by his own acknowledgement, for no reason, said he had suffered from a transient psychomotor epileptic seizure. Then the courts found him innocent by virtue of insanity. Maybe some black people ought to start having some transient psychomotor epileptic seizures. In the early 1980s, police strangled to death a young artist, Michael Stewart. The medical examiner at the time said that Michael Stewart died of coronary arrest without clarifying that everybody dies of coronary arrest. All the victims of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre died of coronary arrest. But it helps to say That arrest occurred after the person was hit with 20 or so bullets from a Tommy gun or had suffered from a stranglehold from a cop arrest. The bad cops are the ones such as Stephen Sullivan, who fired 2 shotgun blasts into a black grandmother whom he claimed held a butcher knife in the hand that was later proven by emergency room physician Harold Osborne, MD, to have already been blown off by the first shotgun blast. The bad cops are the ones such as Volpe and Schwartz, who dragged a Haitian immigrant into a bathroom and ruptured his gut via the rectum with a broken broomstick. The bad cops are the ones such as Officer Richard Hasty, who on Mayor de Blasio's watch broke in the home of an unarmed teenager named Ramarley Graham without a warrant, engaged him, and killed him. Then there are the good cops. The good cops are the ones who courteously and professionally watch the bad cops do what they do without arresting them. In the wake of the Eleanor Bumpurs murder, the good cops made Sullivan a grand marshal for the Emerald Society in the St. Patrick's Day parade. The good cops are the ones who courteously and professionally hurt or kill black people in the course of honorably fulfilling their role as a domestic military created for controlling the security and safety needs of the rich in New York. These good cops make sure that crime stays hemmed into the ghettos and doesn't venture into the areas of the privileged. Good cops make sure that protesters march within strict parameters of time and space to render them ineffective. Good cops courteously and professionally and forcefully terminated a black boycott in Brooklyn of a Korean grocery store. The boycott was conducted because the grocer had disrespected this community. But when non-black community and their black mayor decided that that boycott had gone on for too long, the good cops did their job. It wasn't the bad cops, but it was the bad cops who charged and beat demonstrators at the first Million March because they said it went 1 second over the time limit. Good cops make sure that demonstrations at the UN are penned into an almost invisible cul-de-sac on Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza where no one will see them. If protesters venture out of that space designated or beyond the time allocated, it's the good cops that will gas them, pepper them, tase them, injure, and kill them to courteously, honorably, and violently perform their role of social control. So between the bad cops and the good cops, black people end up individually and collectively traumatized. Collectively, our community demonstrates all the symptoms of a clinically traumatized individual. Many of us are hypervigilant with each other, always trying to decipher who might be out to hurt them. Black people often don't speak to each other. And often because they are traumatized and always expecting the worst, many of our youth have a traumatized heightened startle reflex. They hear a siren and they jump. They see the flashing red lights behind their car and they go into a panic. What makes this so bad is that this trauma is the intent of the police brass. They have wanted black youth to be afraid and have acknowledged that. And this is one of the intentions of the Stop and Frisk program. Although former President Eric Adams is quoted as having said about former Police Commissioner Kelly, quote, Kelly stated that he targeted and focused on that group, black youth, because he wanted to instill fear in them that every time that they left their homes, they could be targeted by the police, unquote. The police are aided in this traumatizing mission by several institutions and policies. The media reports police abuse mainly in the words of the police. Take, for example, the opening paragraph of the first report by WCCO, a local WCBS affiliate in Minneapolis, of the George Floyd murder. This initial news report read as follows. According to Minneapolis police, they responded to the 3700 block of Chicago Avenue South on a report of a forgery around 8 p.m. Monday. They were told a suspect was sitting on top of a blue car and appeared to be under the influence. 2 officers located a male suspect believed to be in his 40s in his car. The suspect got out of his car, following police orders, and allegedly physically resisted officers. When police got the man into handcuffs, they noticed that the man was suffering medical distress. The man was transported to Hennepin County Medical Center by ambulance, where he died a short time later. Anyone who saw what actually happened realizes that this report reads like a disrespectful fairy tale. Worse than that, later in the report, without identifying the cops involved in the incident, the name of the young lady whom the report acknowledges videotaped what actually happened is revealed. Let's be clear that the media could not have aided the killer cops more if they were killer cops themselves. They gave the name of the person who had the evidence against the police, and they presented a fairy tale version of the events that occurred. This is the standard way police violence is handled. The police union and their employers in New York also aid the killer cops by not requiring to give their version of their murders for 48 hours. During that 48 hours, the cops are free to select whichever balloon their colleagues and supporters have floated in the media that seems most believable. The DA and the prosecutor's office and the judges aid the killer cops by prosecuting them in a way most favorable to police. The case of Officer Del Debbio, who shot Black undercover officer Desmond Robinson in the back multiple times, is another such case. An investment banker who witnessed the shooting says that Del Debbio stood on the falling Desmond Robinson and fired into him multiple times. Del Debbio was the first white officer New York prosecutors had ever even sought to bring to trial for shooting a Black officer. It resulted in a conviction for second-degree assault and no jail time. If he had been convicted of first-degree assault or attempted murder, he would have had to serve time. Judges handle police testimony as if it were more credible than testimony of the average citizen. In the rare circumstance that police get convicted, they get lighter sentences for their crimes than the average citizen. In general, the police commissioner lets them retire and keep their pensions. The commissioner also allows the police to press bogus and trumped up charges, for example, assault of a police officer, resisting arrest, interfering with an officer, etc., against the victim or the victim's relatives and supporters. All of this combines to culminate in the Black community having become a traumatized community. For Black people, it is the cops' role of social control that causes them the most problems. Many don't know that the police were formed not to stop crime, something they have never done, but for this role of social control. The NYPD did not exist in New York for hundreds of years. It was only formed in 1845 in response to certain groups such as immigrants, strikers, protesters, and petty criminals that were causing problems for the rich. The department formed to put these groups under proper control, that is, to keep these people from venturing into privileged areas, creating a nuisance for the rich and the mercantile class. The job of the police was to organize those criminals so that they would stay in their own lane, that is, stay in certain sections of the city, and also become a network of snitches that allowed the police and therefore the rich to have greater intel and greater control of the poorer communities. The other reason the police department was formed was to force the poor taxpayers to pay for what essentially amounts to private security for the rich. So because of this principal contradiction of the police, no remedies of the past have ever been effective. Not commissions to study them, not training, not non-civilian review boards, and not liberal mayors. Likewise, the department has never even solved the problem of bad cops, the sick and perverted cops such as Schwartz and Volpe, or even the problem of mafia cops epitomized by Stephen Caracappa and Louis Eppolito, who were actually on the payroll of the mob. These two, among other things, once arrested a man, but instead of taking him to the precinct, took him to a mobster named Gaspipe to be tortured. The department has not even solved the problem, or has not even solved the problem of police such as Franklin Mata and Kenneth Moreno, who participated in the rape of a drunk woman in her apartment in 2008, or detectives Eddie Martins and Richie Hall, convicted of raping a teenage girl in 2017. That they took into custody for marijuana possession. The reason nothing has ever rid the Department of Psychosexual Deviance is because the way that the police use the psychological test in some way seems to select for psychological and for psychosexual deviance. Police have been charged in over 400 rapes in the United States over a 9-year period. These tests rendered by this police department have never screened out white people on the basis of sadism or racism, but have traditionally been quite successful on screening out people on the basis of race. The sick puppy selected for this kennel, this domestic military called the NYPD, serve the same function as special ops for international military forces. That is, they do the very dirty work that is sometimes required to maintain the social order. What is the solution? As long as killer cops serve the mission of social control, the solution to killer cops will not come from the police. It will have to come from the people. So though severely traumatized, the Black community has made a number of self-help efforts to stop police murder. In the 80s, David Walker of the Black United Front created the Police Brutality Investigation Unit under the leadership of Reverend Herbert Daughtry. This unit collected data on police brutality, protested police brutality, and even presented such evidence to a congressional hearing. More recently, activist Jazz Hayden began videotaping the police as they stopped and frisked young Black men in the streets. Others have tried to obviate the alleged need for police occupation of the community by engaging in self-help efforts to rid their communities of crime. The efforts of the Brotherhood of the Mosque Al-Taqwa is one example. Man Up Incorporated is another example. The Black Men Against Crack is another example. The X-Men in Washington, D.C. is one example. And the Peacekeepers in the Northeast, formed by Captain Dennis Muhammad of the Nation of Islam, is another such example. On many of the occasions, what sabotaged these self-help efforts to stop crime has been the police themselves. In the case of Mosque Al-Taqwa, a crack dealer called the police on the Muslims who confronted him about his activity, and the police locked up the Muslims. On more than one occasion, they have arrested the civilian crime fighters trying to stop crime in their community. And those monitoring the police, they've stopped them. Jazz Hayden was arrested by the very two police officers he had earlier monitored on video. They charged him with having dangerous weapons in his car. One of them was a small commemorative bat from a baseball game and a non-functional switchblade knife. Some thought the police would stop killing if they had more training. Yet the police who murdered Ramarley Graham showed that training was sometimes itself the problem. Graham's murderers said that Graham had aroused suspicion while walking down the street when he had hitched up his trousers, and that they had learned in their training that hitching one's pants is a sign that somebody has a gun. Does any more need to be said about training? Garbage in, garbage out. After all, it was cops' martial arts training that helped them strangle and/or beat Anthony Baez, Yvonne Smallwood, Michael Stewart, Peter Funches, and Eric Garner to death. Others have recommended more non-lethal gadgets so that the police would have an alternative to shooting. They've been given flashlights, and they've used those flashlights to beat people such as Reverend Lee Johnson, a Black man in Brooklyn. They've been given handcuffs, and we witnessed the Milwaukee police use those handcuffs to incapacitate George Floyd as they kneeled on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. The police have been given tasers, and they've tased unarmed Ariel Galaza of the Bronx to death, suspecting that the bottle of hot sauce he had in his hand was a knife. Galaza is no exception. By 2018, over 1,000 people in the U.S. had been killed by police with the so-called non-lethal taser. Between 47 and 73% of those have been people of African ancestry. Killer cops are driven to do what they do and could find a way to kill Black people with a pack of Kleenex if those were issued to them. So non-lethal equipment is not the answer. This equipment has all been misused and will continue to be so. Some Black people have said that the solution is more Black cops. Indeed, Black cops collectively have tried to make changes in policing through their organizations, such as the Guardians and the 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care. They have provided the community with much useful information about the police, but they are too few to change the entire department. Edwin Raymond recorded the words of his superiors demanding quotas for arrest in Black and Latino areas. Together with a group of brave officers, Felicia Whitley, Pedro Serrano, Derek Waller, Adhil Polanco, Kareem Abdullah, these officers publicly supported Raymond's assertion. Officer Adhil Polanco went so far as to say that the NYPD is a big mafia. Officer Pierre Maximilian said that officers in Coney Island's Transit District 34 were told to avoid whites, Asians, and Jewish people, referred to as soft targets, and instead focus on blacks and Hispanics while patrolling the subways. These were exceptional Black and Latino officers, and they actually filed a federal lawsuit making their allegations. But they represent a minority of officers that have attempted to make significant change. They are the exception. Even the exceptional Black cops, such as Edwin Raymond, who joins an organization such as the NYPD, whose mission is social control, and which has been shown over and over again to be heavily involved in wrongdoing, it is more likely to be changed by the NYPD rather than change the NYPD in any permanent way. In 2018, Raymond was denied promotion to lieutenant despite scoring 26th out of 1,325 sergeants on the lieutenant's test. Because of his stand, his career has been permanently altered, even though he is, in all likelihood, an exceptional Black cop. The permanent way that NYPD will change the average Black cop is to either corrupt that Black cop, fire him or her, or kill them. The average Black cop's choice for regarding brutality is to either look the other way when the white cops pushes Black people around, or to arrest the cop and face retaliation. Buffalo, New York cop Carol Horn tried to stop fellow officer Gregory Kwiatkowski from choking and punching an already handcuffed suspect. Horn says she was fired for having done this. Some would consider her lucky, because white cops have been known to kill Black cops for less. It's never called murder, only friendly fire. A task force commissioned by Governor David Paterson of New York and led by Harvard professor Christopher Stone revealed that nationwide since 1995, over 2/3, or 10 out of 14, fatal friendly fire victims were, quote, people of color, unquote. If Black cops join the police department, Black cops are going to stop and frisk like the rest of them. Black cops are going to give out bogus tickets like the rest of them. Black cops are going to tell protesters to move along or march over here instead of there. Black cops are going to tell them don't use a bullhorn or don't block the business entrance. Don't block the bridge or you will face arrest. If the demonstrators resist arrest, Black cops are going to tase those righteous demonstrators, club them or shoot them, just like the white ones. Black cops are not going to change these things, or Black cops are not going to change them more than once before they fall victim to friendly fire. Black cops are not going to change these things permanently. If Black cops could change them even for a little while, Black cops would be changed permanently by their colleagues, the white cops, and the white cops' three friends, Mr. Glock, Smith, and Wesson. Speaking of which, another solution presented by the community is to perhaps disarm the police. Proponents for this say there is no reason for the average cop on the beat or in his car to have a firearm. In England, this is not the case. The average cop does not carry a firearm. The only exception is when there is some incident in which firearms are deemed to be necessary, and in those cases, specially trained, authorized firearms officers get involved. This year in the United States, as of June 4th, 2020, 429 civilians have been shot by police. 996 civilians were shot to death in 2018, and 1,004 were shot to death in 2019. So it appears that by the end of 2020, the average will remain at 1,000 per year. Recently, protesters have called for defunding the police, and Mayor de Blasio has chimed in with his watered-down version of defunding, meaning to cut the police budget and apply the money saved to social programs. The fact that the police haven't reacted strongly means they believe that de Blasio is just blustering and that it is clearly unlikely that even this diluted interpretation of defunding could happen. The police could be right, since Mayor de Blasio was unable to tolerate the minimal punishment of back-turning meted out by the police. What would the police do to him if he tried to defund them? Clearly, fake defunding, perhaps even real defunding, would not stop those really sick bullies labeled bad cops. But they are so ill, it is likely that they would be sadistic bullies for free as civilians if their funds and even their badges were taken away. Indeed, there have been studies to show that a large number of police are involved with right-wing groups like the KKK or bordering on the KKK. But at least with defunding, black taxpayers would not have to pay for their own abuse. It would be understandable if the traumatized black community surmised by this time that there is nothing that can be done to stop killer cops. But that has not been the case. Black people have exhibited the resilience that has been described in the work of the great black psychiatrist Carl Bell. Instead of traumatic helplessness or learned helplessness, they have exhibited learned helpfulness. They have demonstrated that characteristic of resilience that Bell called an indomitable fighting spirit. Even the white people that have recently been in the street are there because of black people's indomitable fighting spirit. Many of them are genuinely suffering because they suffer from post-traumatic slave master syndrome, manifested by guilt and disgust at the position of villain they have unwittingly, or I should say unwillingly, been thrust into, mainly by what their ancestors did to the ancestors of others. However, history will reveal if that guilt and disgust will make them go one step further and give reparations to black people. Regardless of what these new possible partial allies do, black people find themselves on what is called by the military strategist and author Sun Tzu, death ground. If Sun Tzu were alive today, witnessing a president of the United States using dubious federal agents to stop demonstrators and being flippant about a worldwide pandemic killing black people in numbers exceeding those of even of killer cops by calling it Kung Flu, he would certainly agree black people are on death ground. And when trying to figure the next step, it does not hurt to remember Tzu's words in his book, The Art of War, in the chapter on the 9 varieties of ground. He says, in difficult ground, press on. In encircled ground, devise stratagems. In death ground, fight. It would also not hurt to remember the words of Marcus Garvey, who said, a race without authority and power is a race without respect. For those who have worried and offered help about the ongoing uninvited police visits to my front door and backyard, I promise to be specific and to tell you what you could do to help me. And I will keep that promise. We have to get power and authority collectively. There is no individual salvation for me. I am a physician, the author of several books, and the past president of the nation's largest union of salaried physicians. I am including this slide because some of you probably wouldn't believe that. The police have a special name for somebody with my bourgeois credentials. Do you know what it is? It's spelled Nigger. It is the same name they have for a criminal. It is the same name they have for doctors, lawyers, council persons, and assembly persons, as well as editors and publishers. Until our people have power and authority, or I should say exercise our power and authority collectively, no one can save me from whatever the police are up to. They are on their post, and I am on mine. They're clearly afraid or they would not harass me. They have guns, the tasers, the military equipment. They have the media. They have a union that operates like a huge street gang and supports them right or wrong. The only thing I have is the truth. Marcus Garvey not only said that a race without authority and power is a race without respect, he was prescriptive in how to obtain and manifest our power and authority. He said, quote, if 400 million Negroes can only get to know themselves, to know that in them is a sovereign power, is an authority that is absolute, then in the next 24 hours we would have a new race, we would have a nation and empire, irrespective of what the world thinks. The 400 million was his estimate of how many Africans there were in the world at that time. So the first part of that statement, he says that we have to unite. We have to know ourselves and understand that within us is a sovereign power and an authority that is absolute. On November the 2nd, the day before Election Day, Black people have to invoke sanctions, economic sanctions. On Election Day and from now on, we have the ability to manifest our sovereign power and absolute authority. We must have a day of absence on November 2nd to demonstrate to ourselves and our opponents. On November the 2nd, no work, no school, no shopping. We have to have reparations for what was done to us, but we will not obtain reparations until we first give ourselves the repairs of unity, self-knowledge, and the self-respect of supporting each other in business, politics, labor law, and all areas of people activity. We must demand the release of our freedom fighters behind the walls. We must demand that they stop incarcerating people in federal supermax just because they are activists. We must demand an investigation into suspected experimentation on our freedom fighters. Why should both Dr. Matulu Shakur and Brother Jamil Alameen, some of you know by the name of H. Rap Brown, both come down with bone marrow cancer after spending time in the same federal supermax prison when there is only an 0.8% likelihood of a person acquiring that disease in a lifetime, and they weren't really supposed to be in a supermax anyway. They hadn't committed federal crimes. Why are all of our political prisoners suffering from cancer or dying young of what they are calling natural causes? Why don't they get parole even after they've been in prison 50 years like Jaleel Muntaqim? Why can Squeaky Foam of the butchering Charlie Manson family try to shoot the president of the United States and get parole, and our political prisoners can't get parole or compassionate discharge when they have terminal and severe illnesses in the middle of a pandemic? If you want to help me, help them. What I have experienced of police harassment is less than the average teenager in Brownsville. The police stop them on the street, sometimes make them lay down in the street, sometimes pat them down, sometimes beat them down. Our political prisoners are with the police 24/7. If you want to help me, let's unite. First around Black Solidarity Day, let's demand that anybody that wants our vote must demand compassionate release for our sick political prisoners and POWs and parole for the others. If we can't get justice for them, if we can't get the murderers of Eleanor Bumpers and Ramarley Graham off the city pension rolls, if we can't get Schwartz off the city payroll making 6 figures after participating in the torture of Adna Louima, then how are we going to protect me? Let's not fool ourselves. There is no individual salvation. Stop telling me to be careful or safe. Tell me to be strong. The Patriot Act and some of these other acts allow them to surveil us 24/7, go into our emails, our computers, tap our phones, track us on the phone, drive past our houses and see how many cell phones are there and who the cell phones belong to. You want to know how you can help me? I love you with all my heart, but I have to tell you the truth. Until we can unite on something as simple as a day of absence, you can't help me stop this wicked system any more than you can help yourself. On November the 2nd, no work, no school, no shopping.